Alabama versus Mississippi. College football pick Saturday. Alabama fell to 7-2 with their 32-31 road overtime defeat at LSU. Crimson Tide posted 465 yards with 137 rushing on 30 carries. Defensively, Alabama allowed over 5 yards per rush with 182 passing on 32 attempts. Bryce Young, a season-low 49% completions with 6.4 yards per attempt. He passed for 328 yards with a touchdown and a pick. On the year, Young, 63% completion rate, 19 touchdowns, 4 picks, 8.2 yards per attempt. Ole Miss 8-1 after their 31-28 road win at Texas A&M as they hit their bye week. Rebels gained 530 yards with 390 rushing on 63 carries. Defensively, the Rebels allowed 6 yards per rush, 338 yards passing on 44 attempts. Jackson Dart completed 65%, 3 touchdowns, 7 yards per attempt here. Season to date, against the SEC, Dart 60% completion rate, 9.1 yards per attempt. Now, Crimson Tide defense on the road allowing 420 yards, 4 yards per rush, 262 passing yards for 8 yards per attempt. At home, Ole Miss is moving the football for 476 yards. The play here will be Mississippi at +12. Georgia versus Mississippi State college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Georgia improved to 9-0 with their 27-13 home win at Tennessee. Bulldogs gained 387 yards in this one, 130 rushing on 37 attempts. Defensively, they allowed just over 2 yards per carry, 195 passing on 33 attempts. Detson Bennett completed 68% of his passes in the win, 10.3 yards per attempt. He threw for 257 yards, 2 touchdowns on the campaign. Bennett, a 68% completion rate, 8.9 yards per attempt. The player will be Mississippi State here at Mississippi State is 6-3 following their 39-33 home win in overtime to Auburn. Bulldogs gained 370 yards in this one, 13 rushing on 18 carries. Defensively, Mississippi State allowed over 5.5 yards per rush to the Tigers with 75 passing yards on 22 attempts. Will Rogers, 71% completion rate, 6.1 yards per attempt. He threw for 357 yards, 3 touchdowns and an interception. This season, Rogers, a 68% completion rate, 26 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 6.6 yards per attempt. Now, Mississippi State, too one-dimensional as a run game. Past 3 SEC games are generating just 1.8 yards per attempt. In this period, Georgia's offense posting 507 yards, 4.9 yards per attempt, 320 through the air, 9.2 per attempt. The play here will be Georgia -16. Kansas State versus Baylor college football pick Saturday. Kansas State fell to 6-3 after their 34-27 home defeat to Texas Longhorns. Wildcats gained 468 yards in this one with 139 rushing on 35 attempts. Defensively, the HSU surrendered 6.5 yards per rush to the Longhorns, 197 passing on 31 attempts. Edwin Martinez completed 67% of his passes in defeat with 9.1 yards per attempt. He threw for 329 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Martinez on the year, 63% completion rate, 7 yards per attempt. He has rushed 106 times for 5.8 yards a carry. Baylor 6-3. It was a 38-35 road win in Oklahoma. Bears posted 413 yards. And they ran it for 281 yards on 48 attempts. Defensively, the Bears allowed over 5 yards a carry to the Sooners with 261 yards passing and 39 attempts. Blake Shapen, 61% completions, 5.7 yards per attempt. He had 1 touchdown and a pick. This season, Shapen has completed 67% of his passes for 8.1 yards per attempt. The play will be on Kansas State. Past 3 games, I should say. Kansas State is moving the football for 451 yards. The Bears 431. Martinez running ability, really tough for opposing defenses. Wildcats defense on the road giving up 440 yards with 269 passing and 7.8 yards per attempt. The player will be Kansas State and Baylor to go over 52. Louisville versus Clemson, college football pick. This one here is on Saturday. Louisville moves to 6-3 with their 34-10 home win at James Madison. Cardinals gained 467 yards with 244 rushing on 45 attempts. Defensively, they held the Dukes to nearly 4 yards per carry with 52 passing yards on 19 attempts. Malik Cunningham completed 70% of his passes with a season-high 11.2 yards per attempt. He threw for 223 yards and 3 touchdowns. On the season, Cunningham, a completion rate here of 62%, 7.4 yards per attempt. Clemson fell to 8-1 after their 35-14 road defeat at Notre Dame. Tigers, the season low, 281 yards, 90 rushing on 25 carries. Defensively, Clemson allowed over 5 yards per rush to the Fighting Irish, 85 passing yards on 17 attempts. DJ Uiagalelei completed 69% with a season low 4.9 yards per attempt. He had 191 passing yards with a touchdown and pick. On the year, DJ, a completion rate of 64%, 18 touchdowns, 5 picks, 7.3 yards per attempt. Clemson back home where they hold opponents at 321 yards, 2.9 yards per attempt. They do run for 5.2 yards a carry on their home turf. Cardinals do have a recent road defeat at Boston College. The play here will be Clemson at -7. LSU versus Arkansas college football pick Saturday. LSU improved to 7-2 with their 32-31 home overtime victory to Alabama. Tigers gained 367 yards in this one, 185 rushing on 34 carries. On defense, they allowed 4.5 yards per rush to the Crimson Tide with 328 passing on 51 attempts. Jaden Daniels, 69% completions, 5.7 yards per attempt. He did run for 95 yards and a touchdown. This season, Daniels nearly 70% completion rate, 7.4 yards per attempt. He's throwing for 14 touchdowns and a pick. Arkansas checks in at 5-4. A 21-19 home defeat to Liberty Flames. Razorbacks produced 428 yards, 144 rushing on 42 carries. On defense, they held Liberty to under 3 yards per rush with 224 passing on 25 attempts. KJ Jefferson, 62% completion, 7.7 yards per attempt in the game. He threw for 284 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. Razorbacks here have failed to cover 3 straight games and losing 2 of those games here. And these are at home. So they failed to cover 3 straight at home, losing 2 of them outright. Tigers in their road games have wins by 10 at Florida, 4 at Auburn. Arkansas has a weak secondary. At home, the Razorbacks are allowing 304 yards passing. Play here, LSU -3. Missouri and Tennessee college football pick. This one goes off on Saturday. Missouri a mark of 4-5 with their 21-17 home defeat to Kentucky. Tigers gained 233 yards in this one with 90 rushing on 33 carries. Defensively, they did limit the Wildcats at 2 yards a carry with 170 passing on 19 attempts. Brady Cook completed 69%, only 5.5 yards per attempt here at 143 yards. On the season, Cook 65% completions, 7.2 yards per attempt. Tennessee, they fell to 8-1 after their 27-13 road defeat at Georgia. Volunteers, a season low, 289 yards, 84 rushing on 42 carries. They allowed over 4 yards per rush to the Bulldogs with 257 passing yards on 25 attempts. Hendon Hooker completed 70% of his passes, season low, 5.9 yards per attempt. He had 195 passing yards and a pick. Hooker on the year, 71% completion rate, 21 touchdowns, 2 picks, 10.1 yards per attempt. Missouri's been held to 17 points in 3 of 4 games. They've gone under in 8 straight. Missouri defense has been strong on the road, holding teams to 263 yards, 4.1 yards per rush, 5.6 yards per pass attempt. Their offense has struggled on the road here. Just 16 points a game average. Play here, Missouri and Tennessee, under 56.5. Oklahoma versus West Virginia college football pick Saturday. Oklahoma fell to 5-4 after their 38-35 home victory to Baylor. Sooners offense produced 499 yards with 238 rushing on 45 carries. Defensively, Oklahoma allowed nearly 6 yards per attempt on the ground with 132 passing on 23 attempts. Dylan Gabriel completed 65% of his throws, 7.7 yards per attempt. He passed for 261 yards with 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Now on the season, Gabriel 64% completion rate, 16 touchdowns, 4 picks, 8.6 yards per attempt. West Virginia, they sit at 3-6 after their 31-14 road defeat at Iowa State. Mountaineers posted only 200 yards with 76 rushing on 22 attempts. Defensively, they surrendered 4.5 yards per rush with 219 passing on 36 attempts. JT Daniels, season low, 36% completion rate, 3.7 yards per attempt. On the year, career low here, 61% completion rate with West Virginia, 6.5 yards per attempt. The Sooners are not strong enough defensively here to slow down this Mountaineer team at home. At home, West Virginia averaging 513 yards a game, but giving up 421 yards. On the road, the Sooners are moving the football for 422 yards, but defensively giving up 456 yards, 5.2 yards per rush, 260 passing. Play here will be Oklahoma and West Virginia over 66. South Carolina versus Florida college football pick Saturday. South Carolina, they improved to 6-3 with that 38-27 road win at Vanderbilt. Gamecocks posted 492 yards, 208 rushing on 35 carries. Defensively, they allowed 5.5 yards per carry to the Commodores with 228 passing on 33 attempts. Spencer Rattler, 69% completion rate, 8.1 yards per attempt. He threw for 186 yards and 3 touchdowns. This season, Rattler, 64% completions, 8 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 7.4 yards per attempt. Florida improved to 5-4. After that 41-24 road win at Texas A&M, Gators produced 492 yards in this one, 291 rushing on 50 carries. On defense, Florida allowed only 5 yards a carry to the Aggies with 279 yards passing on 45 attempts. Anthony Richardson completed 61% in the victory, 7.2 yards per attempt. This season, Richardson, 56% completion rate, 9 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 7.8 yards per attempt. Back-to-back road games for the Gamecocks. Gators at home rushing for 7.1 yards a carry. South Carolina on the road allowing 216 rushing yards and 4.6 yards per rush. Play here will be Florida -8. TCU versus Texas college football pick. This one here is on Saturday. TCU improved to 9-0 with their 34-24 home win to Texas Tech. Horned Frogs gained 429 yards with 234 rushing on 51 carries. On defense, they allowed nearly 5 yards per rush to the Red Raiders with 157 passing on 32 attempts. Max Duggan had a season-low 52% completion rate with 8.5 yards per attempt. He threw for 195 yards and 2 touchdowns. This season, Duggan 66% completion rate, 9.9 yards per attempt. His top receiver, Quentin Johnson, is questionable with an ankle. Texas is 6-3 after their 34-27 road win in Kansas State. Longhorns gained 486 yards, 269 rushing on 40 carries. Offensively, they limited Kansas State to 4 yards per carry with 329 passing on 36 attempts. Quinn Ewers completed 58% with a season-low 6.4 yards per attempt. On the year, Ewers a 58% completion rate, 7.7 yards per attempt. Without his top receiver, Duggan found a way to get past Texas Tech by 10 at home. Past 3 games, Horned Frogs defense holding teams to 388 yards. In this period, Texas allowing 469 yards, 350 passing for 8.1 yards per attempt. The player will be on at TCU plus 7.5. Texas A&M and Auburn, a college football pick Saturday. Texas A&M fell to 3-6 with their 41-24 home defeat to Florida. Aggies gained 403 yards in this one, 134 rushing on 25 attempts. Defensively, they surrendered nearly 6 yards per carry to the Gators. 201 passing yards on 28 attempts. Connor Wegman missed the game due to the flu, but his practice this week on the season, Wegman completed 61% of his passes, 7.3 yards per attempt, 4 touchdowns. Auburn fell to 3-6 with their 39-33 road defeat in overtime to Mississippi State. Tigers gained 331 yards with 256 rushing on 46 attempts. They limited the Bulldogs to under a yard per rush with 357 passing on 62 attempts. Robbie Ashford, a season-low 32% completions, 3.4 yards per attempt. This season, Ashford, a 50% completion rate, 7 yards per attempt. Wegman back will spark this Aggies offense. Past 3 games, Auburn defense giving up 489 yards, 5.5 yards per rush, 140 passing. The play here will be on Texas A&M plus the 1.5. UCF versus Tulane college football pick. This one here is on Saturday. UCF sits at 7-2 after their 35-28 road win at Memphis. Knights posted 427 yards with 204 rushing on 42 carries. Defensively, they allowed over 4 yards per rush to the Tigers with 284 passing yards on 39 attempts. Jason Plumlee is questionable with an injury. He missed the game last week. Mikey Keene in relief completed 78% of his passes, 7.8 yards per attempt in the win. He threw for 219 yards, 3 touchdowns and a pick. This season, Keene over 75% completion rate, 8.1 yards per attempt. Tulane improved to 8-1. It was a 27-13 road win at Tulsa. A Green Wave gained 482 yards with 357 rushing on 53 carries. Defensively, they held the Golden Hurricane to about 3 yards per rush with 146 passing on 24 passes. Michael Pratt completed 58% in the victory, 6.6 yards per attempt. He's passed for 125 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Now, UCF has a notable home win to Cincinnati. On the road, the Knights are gaining 502 yards, 5 yards per rush, and 286 yards passing with 8.4 yards per attempt. The play here will be on UCF at plus the 1.5. Washington versus Oregon, a college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Washington improved to 7-2 with their 24-21 home win to Oregon State. Huskies gained 398 yards in this one with 100 rushing on 24 carries. Defensively, they gave up over 4 yards per rush to the Beavers with 87 passing on 19 attempts. Michael Penix, a season low 58% completion rate in these windy conditions, 5.7 yards per attempt. He threw for 298 yards with a touchdown and pick. In Pac-12 play, Penix, a 67% completion rate with 7.6 yards per attempt. He has passed for 13 touchdowns and 4 picks against the conference. Oregon improves 8-1 with their 49-10 road win at Colorado. Ducks posted 479 yards with 195 rushing on 39 carries. They held the Buffs to over 3 yards per attempt with 247 passing yards on 34 attempts. Bo Nix, 83% completion rate in the win, 11.4 yards per attempt. He threw for 274 yards and 2 touchdowns. Against the Pac-12, Nix, a 74% completion rate with 9.9 yards per attempt. Nix has 12 touchdowns, 2 picks facing the Pac-12. Huskies have struggled on the road, surrendering 400 yards with 267 passing and 8.3 yards per attempt. They have failed to cover all 3 on the road with losses at UCLA and Arizona State. They gave up 40 at UCLA, 45 at Arizona State. The play here will be Oregon at minus 12.5. Wisconsin versus Iowa, college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Wisconsin improved to 5-4 after their 23-10 home win to Maryland. Badgers gained 355 yards in this one with 278 rushing on 46 attempts. Defensively, they held the Terrapins to under 3 yards a carry with 77 yards passing on 23 attempts. Graham Mertz, a season low 28% completions with 4.3 yards per attempt on the year. Mertz, 60% completion rate, career high, 8.3 yards per attempt. Iowa's 5-4 after their 24-3 road win at Purdue. Hawkeyes posted 376 yards in this one with 184 rushing on 35 carries. Defensively, Iowa held the Boilermakers to under 3 yards a carry with 168 passing yards on 43 attempts. Spencer Petras completed 56% of his passes in this one, 8.3 yards per attempt. He threw for 192 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the year, Petras, career lows here, 56% completion rate, 6.1 yards per attempt. Iowa offense has picked it up here, averaging 27 points per game here over their past 3 games. Badgers averaging 29 points and 340 yards. The play here will be Wisconsin, Iowa over 35. Arizona State versus Washington State, college football pick Saturday. Arizona State falls to 3-6 with their 50-36 home defeat to UCLA. Sun Devils gained 468 yards with 119 rushing on 31 carries. On defense, ASU allowed over 9 yards per carry with 169 passing on 20 attempts. Trenton Bourguet is questionable with an injury and has not practiced as of Wednesday. Emory Jones has been working with the first team in practice early this week. Jones this season is completing 62% of his passes, 7.7 yards per attempt. Washington State improved to 5-4 with that 52-14 road win at Stanford. Cougars posted a season high of 514 yards, 306 rushing on 38 attempts. Defensively, they held the Cardinals to under 3 yards per carry with 266 yards passing on 42 attempts. Cameron Ward completed 50% in the win, 5.5 yards per attempt. He threw for 176 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the season, Ward, a 64% completion rate, 19 touchdowns, 8 picks, 6.9 yards here per attempt. ASU has seen a pump up here in offensive production, as in their past 3 games, averaging 460 yards with 337 passing with 8.6 yards per attempt. Washington State in this period struggling with pass protection, allowing 3.3 sacks a game. They had lost 3 straight prior to beating Stanford as they struggled to score points. The play here will be Arizona State here at +8. Arizona versus UCLA, college football pick Saturday. Arizona dropped to 3-6 with their 45-20 road defeat at Utah. Wildcats gained 387 yards in this one, 156 rushing on 25 carries. Defensively, the Wildcats limited the Utes' passing game but allowed 306 rushing yards on 55 carries. Jane DeLaura completed 50% in defeat with 8 yards per attempt. He threw for a season low 159 yards on the season to Laura. 62% completion rate, 8.3 yards per attempt. UCLA improved to 8-1 with their 50-36 road win at Arizona State. Bruins posted a Pac-12 high, 571 yards, 402 rushing on 42 attempts. Defensively, they limited ASU on the ground for less than 4 yards per rush, with 349 passing on 49 attempts. Dorian Thompson-Robinson completed 65% of his passes, 8.5 yards per attempt. He rushed for 120 yards, 2 touchdowns. Arizona has allowed 45 or greater points in every Pac-12 game but one. That exception was against a down Colorado team. Bruins have covered 4 or 5 at home. The play here will be, Bruins have covered 4 or 5 at home against the Wildcats. The play here will be on UCLA minus the 19.5. California versus Oregon State college football pick Saturday. California fell to 3-6 with their 41-35 road defeat at USC. Golden Bears gained 469 yards, 63 rushing on 24 carries. Defensively, they allowed 5 yards per rush to the Trojans with 360 passing on 28 attempts. Jack Plummer in this one completed 71%, 8.3 yards per attempt. He threw for 406 yards, many of it in the second half. 3 touchdowns and interception. On the air, Plummer 62% completion rate, 7 yards per attempt. Oregon State 6-3 with their 24-21 road defeat at Washington. Beavers a season low 262 yards, 175 rushing on 40 attempts. Defensively, they allowed 4 yards per rush to the Huskies with 298 passing on 52 attempts. Ben Gulbranson completed 63% of his passes in defeat with a season low 4.6 yards per attempt. On the air, Gulbranson 62% completion rate, 7.7 yards per attempt. Cal is just really a one-dimensional team without a good running game. Past 3 games, they're throwing for 326 yards and 7.7 yards per attempt. The play here will be on California plus 13.5. Florida State versus Syracuse college football pick Saturday. Florida State is 6-3 after their 45-3 road win at Miami. Seminoles posted 454 yards in the win, 229 rushing on 49 carries. On defense, Florida State allowed 4 yards per rush with 62 passing yards on 19 attempts. Jordan Travis, season highs here, 83% completions in this completion rate in this one. He threw for 202 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Travis this season a 63% completion rate, 17 touchdowns, 4 picks, and 9.1 yards per attempt. Syracuse fell to 6-3 after their 19-9 road defeat at Pittsburgh. Orange a season low 145 yards, 25 rushing on 25 attempts. Defensively, they allowed just over 3 yards per rush with 175 passing on 24 attempts. Carlos Del Rio Wilson completed 35% of his passes, 5.2 yards per attempt. On the air, Del Rio Wilson a 44% completion rate, 6.8 yards per attempt. Orange defense has played well at home, holding teams to 295 yards, 3.5 yards per rush. They're holding teams to 17.7 points a game in their stadium. Orange quarterback situation a major concern as their offensive production has dropped considerably the past 3 games as they're averaging just 241 yards a game. Play here will be Florida State and Syracuse under 51. Indiana versus Ohio State college football pick Saturday. Indiana drops to 3-6 with their 45-14 home defeat to Penn State. Hoosiers gained a season low 196 yards with 65 rushing on 34 carries. On defense, they surrendered 3.5 yards per rush with 304 passing yards on 35 attempts. Dexter Williams completed 36%, 2 interceptions, and 3.7 yards per attempt. That was his first action this season. Connor Bazelak did not play, and his backup Jack Tuttle was injured, so the Hoosiers had to look to their third-string quarterback here. Iowa State improved to 9-0, a 21-17 road win at Northwestern. Buckeyes were held to a season low 283 yards, 207 rushing on 35 carries. Defensively, they allowed about 3.5 yards per rush and 79 passing yards on 17 attempts. C.J. Stroud completed a season low 38%, 2.9 yards per pass attempt. On the year, Stroud a 68% completion rate, 29 touchdowns, 4 picks, about 10 yards per attempt. Hoosiers may just run the ball on every down based on their quarterback situation. Play here will be Indiana and Ohio State under 57.5. Iowa State versus Oklahoma State college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Iowa State improved to 4-5 with their 31-14 home win to West Virginia. Cyclones put up 391 yards in this one with 172 rushing on 38 carries. On defense, they allowed the Mountaineers to over 3 yards per carry with 124 passing on 27 attempts. Hunter Deckers completed 66% of the passes in the win, 6.1 yards per attempt. He threw for 219 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the year, Deckers at 67% completion rate, 6.7 yards per attempt. Oklahoma State fell to 6-3 with their 37-16 road loss at Kansas. Cowboys put up 415 yards, 111 rushing on 35 carries. Defensively, Oklahoma State allowed over 7 yards per rush to the Jayhawks with 23 yards passing on 18 attempts. Spencer Sanders remains questionable on the year. He is completing 58% of his passes with 7.6 yards per attempt. Third string Garrett Rangel started 67% completion rate in the game, 7.6 yards per attempt. He threw for 304 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 picks. Rangel performance encouraging in this home game here. Cyclones on the road averaging only 343 yards, and the Cowboys at home put up 501 yards a game. The play here will be Oklahoma State at plus the 1.5. Kansas versus Texas Tech, college football pick Saturday. Kansas improved here to 6-3 after their 37-16 home win to Oklahoma State. Jayhawks gained 554 yards, 351 rushing on 46 attempts. Defensively, they limited the Cowboys to 3 yards a carry with 304 passing yards on 40 attempts. Jalen Daniels has been practicing with the backups, so this definitely points to a being start. Jason B completed 78% of his passes in the win with 8.8 yards per attempt. He passed for 203 yards and 2 touchdowns. This season being a 66% completion rate, 9.6 yards per attempt. Now Texas Tech, they're 4-5 after that 43-24 road defeat at TCU. Red Raiders gained 340 yards in this one, 189 rushing on 39 carries. Defensively, Texas Tech allowed nearly 5 yards per rush, 195 passing, 23 attempts. Now Tyler Shaw completed 41% of his passes in defeat, 3.5 yards here per attempt. On the year, Slough, a 47% completion rate, 7 yards per attempt. Past 3 games, Jayhawks are running for 506 yards per attempt. Prefer being over Shaw here at the quarterback. The player will be on Kansas minus 3.5. Maryland versus Penn State, college football pick Saturday. Maryland fell to 6-3 with their 23-10 road defeat at Wisconsin. Terrapins gained a season low 189 yards with 112 rushing on 41 carries. Defensively, they surrendered 6 yards per rush with 77 yards passing on 18 attempts. Talai Tagovailoa, season low here, 43% completions with 3.3 yards per attempt. He threw for 77 yards with a touchdown and pick on the season. Tagovailoa, 70% completion rate, 8 yards per attempt. Penn State improved to 7-2 after their 45-14 road win here at Indiana. The Lions gained 483 yards in this one with 179 rushing on 49 carries. Eventually, they held the Hoosiers to under 2 yards per carry with 131 passing yards on 39 attempts. Sean Clifford completed 65% with season highs here, 10 yards per attempt. He threw for 229 yards with an interception. This year, Clifford, 63% completion rate, 8 yards per attempt. Weather impacted Terrapins' offense. At home, Nittany Lions moved the football for 459 yards, 4.7 yards per rush, 7.7 yards per pass attempt. Terrapins' pass offense on the road is posting 260 yards, 7.5 yards per attempt. Play here will be on Maryland and Penn State over 58. Miami versus Georgia Tech, college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Miami moved to 4-5 with their 45-3 home defeat to Florida State. Hurricanes a season low 188 yards with 126 rushing on 33 carries. Defensively, they did allow 4.5 yards per rush to the Seminoles with 225 passing on 16 attempts. Jake Garcia threw 2 passes in the loss. Ja'Cory Brown completed 55% of his throws, 4.1 yards per attempt. This season, Brown, 42% completion rate, 3.1 yards per attempt. Georgia Tech improved to 4-5 after their 28-27 road win at Virginia Tech. Yellow Jackets season high, 463 yards, 210 rushing on 43 attempts. Defensively, Georgia Tech allowed 3.5 yards per rush, 166 yards passing on 27 attempts. Jeff Sims missed the game with precaution, recovering from a foot injury. He was a full participant in practice last week. On the year, Sims a 58% completion rate, 5.9 yards per attempt, Zach Pyron in his start last week hit on 59% completion rate, 7.9 yards per attempt. He saw significant action in the past 2 weeks and averaged 62% completion rate, 7.5 yards per attempt. Pyron upgrades the offense for the Yellow Jackets. Past 3 games, Yellow Jackets allowing 452 yards. The play here will be Miami and Georgia Tech over 44. Nebraska versus Michigan college football pick Saturday. Nebraska fell to 3-6 after their 20-13 home defeat to Minnesota. Cornhuskers produced a season low 267 yards, 146 rushing on 35 attempts. On defense, Nebraska allowed under 3 yards per rush to the Gophers with 175 passing on 20 attempts. Casey Thompson missed practice in his elbow with his injured elbow. Sophomore here, Chuba Purdy completed 37% in the loss, 2.6 yards per attempt on the season. Purdy, 44% completions, 3 picks, 2.5 yards per attempt. Logan Smothers also saw action, went 5 of 10 for 80 yards. Michigan moved to 9-0 with their 52-17 road win at Rutgers. Wolverines produced 433 yards, 282 rushing on 53 attempts. On defense, they held the Scarlet Knights to just 1 yard per carry, just over 1 yard per carry, 166 passing on 29 attempts. Quarterback situation, major concern here for Nebraska. The play here will be Nebraska and Michigan under for the total of 51. North Carolina and Wake Forest college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. North Carolina improves to 8-1. It was a 31-28 road win at Virginia. Tar Heels were able to move the football for 455 yards, 162 rushing on 42 attempts. Defensively, they allowed 4.5 yards of carry on the ground to the Cavaliers with 232 passing on 35 attempts. Drake May hit on 70% completion rate, 35 attempts in that one. It's an impressive number by Drake here with those numbers. 2 touchdowns as well. May, 71% completion rate for the season, 31 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and 9.5 yards per pass attempt. Wake Forest fell to 6-3. It was a 30-21 road defeat at NC State. Demon Deacons posted 414 yards, 17 rushing on 27 carries. Defensively, Wake Forest allowed under 3 yards a carry with 210 passing on 28 attempts. Sam Harton, while he had a 60% completion rate, 8.3 yards per attempt, he had 397 passing yards and 2 touchdowns and 3 picks. That is 6 picks in 2 games all on the road. This season, Hartman, 63% completion rate, 8.8 yards per attempt. Past 3 games, Demon Deacons running for only 2.1 yards a carry. Hartman's turnover consumed. The play will be Carolina plus the 4.5. Northwestern versus Minnesota college football pick. Action on Saturday. Northwestern fell to 1-8 with their 21-7 home defeat to Ohio State. Wildcats gained only 285 yards with 206 rushing on 59 carries. Offensively, they allowed nearly 6 yards per rush to the Buckeyes with 76 passing on 26 attempts. Brendan Sullivan, 71% completion rate with 5.6 yards per pass attempt in defeat. He threw for only 79 yards on the season. Sullivan, 73% completion rate, 5.8 yards per attempt. Minnesota improved to 6-3 with their 20-13 road win at Nebraska. Golden Gophers gained 300 yards in this one with 125 rushing on 45 attempts. Tanner Morgan exited the game with an upper body injury. This season, he is completing a career-high 67% completions, 8.7 yards per attempt. Sophomore Ethan Kalikmanis completed 50% in relief with 11.5 yards per attempt on the air. Kalikmanis, 44% completion rate, a touchdown, 3 picks, 8.8 yards per attempt. Quarterback situation not good for either team. Expect a lot of running in this game. The play here will be Northwestern, Minnesota under 41.5. Notre Dame versus Navy college football pick Saturday. Notre Dame improves to 6-3 after their 35-14 home win to Clemson. Flying Irish gained 348 yards with 263 rushing on 47 carries. Defensively, they held the Tigers to just over 3 yards per rush with 191 passing on 40 attempts. Drew Pine completed 53% of his passes with 5 yards per rush. He's passed for 85 yards and a touchdown. On the year, Pine, 61% completion rate, 7 yards per attempt. Navy moved to 3-6 after their 20-10 road defeat at Cincinnati. Midshipmen gained 262 yards in this one, 178 rushing on 52 carries. Defensively, they surrendered 3 yards per rush to the Bearcats with 299 passing on 35 attempts. Xavier Airline threw just one pass but rushed it 12 times for 87 yards. He has now thrown 5 passes all season and is now the starter due to the season-ending injury to Lavatai with that knee. Masai Minor also saw action. Better passer of the two quarterbacks. He went 3 of 5 for 81 in his first action of the season, and we expect to see rotating quarterbacks here in this one. Now, Notre Dame sees a lot of Navy throughout the years and has had success defending them and moving the football offensively against Navy. Play here Notre Dame -17. Pittsburgh versus Virginia college football pick. This one here goes off here on Saturday. Pittsburgh has a mark of 5-4 after their 19-9 home win to Syracuse. Panthers produced 337 yards with 167 rushing on 48 attempts. On defense, they stuffed the Orange run game for 1 yard per carry average, 120 passing on 23 attempts. Keenan Slovis, 69% completion rate in the game, 7.7 yards per attempt. On the year, though, Slovis, 59%, 7.5 yards per attempt. Now, Virginia, they dropped to 3-6 with their 31-28 home defeat to North Carolina. Cavaliers did produce 418 yards, 186 rushing on 39 carries. On defense, they limited the Tar Heels to 4 yards per carry, 293 passing on 37 attempts. Brendan Armstrong completed just 48% of his passes, 6.6 yards per attempt. This year, Armstrong, career lows, 55% completion rate, 6.7 yards per attempt. He's thrown 6 touchdowns with 10 interceptions. Virginia has been competitive due to their defense. Slovis' performance with Pittsburgh, his career worst here. Past 3 games, Cavaliers holding teams at 310 yards. Play here, Virginia +4. Purdue versus Illinois college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Purdue has a mark of 5-4 with their 24-3 home defeat to Iowa. Boilermakers gained a season low 255 yards, 87 rushing on 31 carries. On defense, they did give up over 5 yards per rush with 192 passing on 23 carries. Aiden O'Connell, a season low 46% completion rate, 3.9 yards per attempt. He has had 168 passing yards with 2 interceptions. This season, O'Connell, 64% completion rate, 6.8 yards per attempt, which is drastically down from last season. Illinois fell to 7-2 after their 23-15 home defeat at Michigan State. Final Illini posted 441 yards, 153 rushing on 47 carries. Defensively, they allowed nearly 4 yards per carry with 182 passing on 29 attempts. Tommy DeVito, 67% completion rate, 7.8 yards per attempt. He threw for 288 yards and 2 touchdowns. This year, DeVito, career high, 72% completion rate, 7.4 yards per attempt. He has thrown for 14 touchdowns and 2 picks. Purdue has defended the run well, limiting opponents to 3.8 yards per rush. Play here will be Purdue +7. Rutgers versus Michigan State college football picks Saturday. Rutgers falls to 4-5 with their 52-17 home defeat to Michigan. Scarlet Knights gained 180 yards in this one, 14 rushing on 19 attempts. Defensively, they gave up over 5 yards per rush to the Wolverines with 151 passing on 27 attempts. Gavin Wimsatt completed 48%, 5.7 yards per attempt. He threw for 166 yards with a touchdown and 3 picks. On the year, Wimsatt, a 43% completion rate, 5.1 yards per attempt. Michigan State 4-5 after a 23-15 road win at Illinois. Spartans posted 294 yards in this one, 112 rushing on 29 carries. Defensively, they held the Fighting Illini to just 3 yards per rush, 288 passing on 37 attempts. Peyton Thorne completed a season high 65%, 6.3 yards per attempt. He had 2 touchdowns, 1 pick, 182 yards. This season, Thorne, a 64% completion rate, 7.1 yards per attempt. Now, the Spartans' offense averaging only 332 yards this season. Scarlet Knights' defense holding opponents to 311 yards, but on offense, gaining only 291 yards. Play here, Rutgers and Michigan State under 40. San Jose State versus San Diego State. College football pick. This one is on Saturday. San Jose State improved to 6-2 with their 28-16 home victory to Colorado State. Spartans gained 355 yards in this one, 81 rushing on 21 carries. On defense, the Spartans allowed nearly 4 yards per rush with 333 passing yards on 34 attempts. He did produce 9 sacks. Chevan Cordeiro completed 64% of his passes with 6.5 yards per attempt. He threw for 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. On the season, Cordeiro a 60% completion rate, 7.6 yards per attempt. San Diego State, they're 5-4 after their 14-10 home win to UNLV. Aztecs posted 315 yards, 99 rushing on 41 attempts. On defense, they allowed 3.5 yards per rush to the Rebels with 207 passing on 27 attempts. Jalen Maiden completed 61% of his passes, 7 yards per attempt. He passed for 216 yards with 2 touchdowns and an interception. This season, Maiden is completing 64% of his passes, 8.5 yards per attempt. Aztecs pass defense past 3 games, allowing 264 yards with 7 yards per attempt. Spartans in that period throwing for 302 yards and 6.8 yards per attempt. Teams with good passing games have scored points on the San Diego State defense. Play here will be on the San Diego State defense. Play here will be on San Jose State at -2.5. SMU versus USF college football pick Saturday. SMU improved to 5-4 after their 77-63 home win to Houston, a wild one. Mustangs posted 651 yards, 272 rushing on 43 carries. Defensively, the Mustangs allowed over 10 yards per attempt with 528 passing yards. And when I say 10 yards per rush attempt is what the Mustangs allowed, along with 528 passing yards on 54 attempts. Tanner Mordecai completed 76%, 10.2 yards per attempt. He had 379 passing yards and 9 touchdown passes. This season, Mordecai is 63% completion rate, 8.3 yards per attempt. USF, they're 1-8 after a 54-28 road defeat at Temple. Bulls produced 471 yards, 281 rushing on 43 carries. Defensively, they surrendered 9 yards per rush to the Owls with 344 passing on 36 attempts. They had the loss of Gary Bohannon for the season. They're starting quarterback, so it's Contravious Marsh, the backup, completed half his passes in that one for 8 yards per attempt. He threw for 3 touchdowns and a pick. Now, in the year, Marsh, a 56% completion rate, 7.9 yards per attempt. Past 3 games, Bulls defense giving up 558 yards and 47 points a game. SMU defense in this period allowing 496 yards, 42 points a game. It's getting later in the season. We're starting to see some of these defenses getting gassed here. The play here, SMU and USF over 73.5. Stanford versus Utah college football pick Saturday. Stanford fell to 3-6 with their 52-14 home defeat to Washington State. Cardinal gained 337 yards, 71 rushing on 28 carries. Offensively, they surrendered 7.5 yards per rush to the Cougars with 208 passing on 34 attempts. Tanner McKee completed 57% of his passes, 5.9 yards per attempt. This season, McKee a 61% completion rate, 6.9 yards per attempt. Utah, they're 7-2 after their 45-20 home win to Arizona. Utes produced 457 yards, 306 rushing on 55 carries. Eventually, they allowed 6 yards per rush to the Wildcats with 231 passing on 30 attempts. Cameron Rising returned and hit on 52% in the win with 6 yards per attempt. He threw for 151 yards and a touchdown. Now this year, Rising a 67% completion rate, 16 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 8.4 yards per attempt. Past 3 games, Stanford defense allowing 464 yards, 6.5 yards per rush, 7 yards per pass attempt. Utes running for 5.3 yards a carry in this period. Play will be Utah minus the 23.5. Temple versus Houston college football pick Saturday. Temple sits at 3-6 after that 54-28 home win at USF. Alice gained 621 yards, 277 rushing on 30 carries. On defense, Temple allowed nearly 7 yards per rush, 190 passing on 27 attempts. E.J. Warner, he hit season highs here, 75% passing, 9.6 yards per attempt. Season high yards here, 344 yards. He did pass for 2 touchdowns. On the year, Warner, 56% completion rate, 6.5 yards per attempt. Houston, they fought a 5-4. It was a wild game here. A 77-63 road defeat at SMU. Cougars here, season high, 710 yards in defeat, 182 rushing on 17 carries. Defensively, the Cougars gave up over 6 yards per rush and 379 passing yards on 37 attempts. Clayton Tune, 68% completions in the loss, 10 yards per attempt. He threw for 527 yards, 7 touchdowns, 3 picks though. Isles don't have the offensive prowess of the Mustangs. Past 3 games, Cougars averaging 547 yards, 6.1 yards per rush, 392 yards passing for 9.6 yards per attempt. Play here will be Houston at minus the 20. Vanderbilt versus Kentucky, college football pick. This one here goes off on Saturday. Vanderbilt drops to 3-6 with their 38-27 home defeat to South Carolina. Commodores put up 454 yards with 226 rushing on 41 carries. Defensively, the Commodores surrendered nearly 7 yards per rush with 284 passing on 28 attempts. Mike Wright completed 53% of his passes with 6.7 yards per attempt. This season, Wright had a 58% completion rate with 6.8 yards per attempt. Kentucky 6-3 with their 21-17 road win at Missouri. Wildcats gained only 252 yards in this one with 82 rushing on 41 carries. Defensively, they limited the Tigers to under 3 yards per carry with 143 passing on 26 attempts. Will Levis completed 68% with 8.9 yards per attempt. He threw for only 170 yards and 3 touchdowns. On the year, Levis a career high here, 68% completion rate, 9.1 yards per attempt. Wildcats defense has been outstanding at home, holding teams at 278 yards. They also moved the football for 403 yards and 280 passing with 9.7 yards per attempt in their home stadium. The play here will be Kentucky minus 17.5. Wyoming and Colorado State, college football pick Saturday. Wyoming improved to 6-3. It was a 27-20 road win in Hawaii as they hit the bye. Cowboys posted 441 yards, 365 rushing on 44 attempts. Defensively, they did give up 5 yards per rush to the Warriors with 205 passing yards on 46 attempts. Andrew Peasley, he completed just 47% of his passes in the win, 5.7 yards per attempt. He passed for 76 yards and 2 interceptions. On the season, Peasley a 53% completion rate with 6 yards per attempt. Colorado, they dropped to 2-7 after a 28-16 road defeat to San Jose State. Rams gained 468 yards in this one, 135 rushing on 36 attempts. Defensively, the Rams held the Spartans to under 4 yards a carry with 274 passing yards on 42 attempts. Clay Millen completed 62% of his passes in the loss with a season-high 10.9 yards per attempt. He passed for 269 yards and 1 interception. This year, Millen a 70% completion rate, 7.9 yards per attempt. If the Cowboys couldn't separate enough against Hawaii to cover, Peasley's lack of accuracy is the issue. The play will be Colorado State plus 9.5. UL Monroe versus Georgia State, college football pick Saturday. UL Monroe 3-6 after their 31-30 home win to Texas State. Bobcats posted 381 yards in this one with 68 rushing on 28 carries. Defensively, the Warhawks allowed over 4 yards per rush with 237 passing on 41 attempts. Chandler Rogers, 70% completion rate, 7.8 yards per attempt. He threw for 310 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. This season, Rogers, a 71% completion rate, 8.1 yards per attempt. Georgia State 4-5 after their 42-14 road win at Southern Miss. Panthers gained 521 yards, 388 rushing on 59 carries. Defensively, Georgia State held the Golden Eagles to just over 1 yard per rush, 169 yards rushing on 32 carries. Darren Grainer completed 65% in victory, 5.8 yards per attempt. He passed for 133 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the campaign, Granger, 56% completions, 7.5 yards per attempt. Warhawks defense on the road giving up 468 yards, 5.3 yards per rush. At home, the Panthers giving up 448 yards with 313 passing, 8.7 yards per attempt. The play here will be on UL Monroe and Georgia State over 59. Massachusetts versus Arkansas State. College football pick Saturday. UMass here fell to 1-8 after their 27-10 road defeat at UConn. Minutemen a season high 369 yards with 103 rushing on 31 carries. Defensively, UMass allowed 6 yards per rush with only 60 passing yards on 13 attempts. Brady Olson, 56% completion rate, season high 7.8 yards per attempt. The sophomore threw for a season high 266 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Arkansas State, they're 2-7 after their 31-3 home defeat to South Alabama. Red Wolves, a season low, 158 yards, negative 19 rushing yards on 19 attempts. They allowed 4 sacks, losing 43 yards. Defensively, they surrendered nearly 4 yards per carry to the Jaguars with 179 passing on 24 attempts. James Blackman completed season lows here, 56%, 4.5 yards per attempt. This year, Blackman's completing 67% of his passes, 7.5 yards per attempt. UMass has been held to 13 or fewer points in 5 of 6 at home. Red Rose completing 67% of their passes, 7.3 yards per pass attempt. The play here will be on Arkansas State here at the -17. Utah State versus Hawaii college football pick Saturday. Utah State sits at 4-5 after their 27-10 home win to New Mexico. Aggies put up 280 yards with 131 rushing on 41 carries. Defensively, they limited the Lobos' passing game and allowed 216 rushing on 46 carries. Cooper Legas completed 48% of his passes with 5.5 yards per pass attempt. He passed for 149 yards and a touchdown. This season, Legas, 60% completion rate, 6.2 yards per attempt. Hawaii 2-8 after a 55-13 road defeat at Fresno State. Warriors gained 362 yards with 158 rushing on 34 carries. Offensively, they surrendered 6 yards per rush with 327 passing yards on 29 carries. Brain Shager completed 50% of his passes, 5.1 yards per attempt. He passed for 204 yards with a touchdown and pick on the season. Shager, a 56% completion rate, 5.7 yards per attempt. Aggies have struggled on the road. They've averaged just 284 yards while giving up 437 yards with 5.7 yards per rush. Prior to their loss at Fresno State, the Warriors had covered 6 of 7. Play here will be Hawaii at plus the 10.5. Virginia Tech versus Duke college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Virginia Tech drops to 2-7 with their 28-27 home defeat to Georgia Tech. Hokies gained 304 yards with 138 rushing on 39 carries. Defensively, they did allow nearly 5 yards a carry with 253 passing on 32 attempts. Grant Wells completed 56% with 6.6 yards per attempt and a pick. On the year, the Marshall transfer a career low 58% completion rate with 6.5 yards per attempt. Duke moved to 6-3 with their 38-31 road win at Boston College. Blue Devils produced 390 yards with 232 rushing on 41 carries. Defensively, the Blue Devils held BC to under 3 yards a carry with 330 passing on 45 attempts. Riley Leonard completed 67% of his passes, 6.6 yards per attempt. This year, Leonard a completion rate of 64%, 7.5 yards per attempt. Hokies have lost 6 straight at home. Duke's strong offensive team averaging 460 yards, 5.9 yards per rush, along with 8.7 yards per pass attempt. Hokies posting only 19 points a game on the road, 29% on third down. Play here, Duke minus 9.5. Texas State versus South Alabama college football pick Saturdays. Texas State fell to 3-6 with a 31-30 road defeat at UL Monroe. The Bobcats posted 367 yards, 130 rushing on 32 attempts. Defensively, they held the Warhawks to just over 2 yards per carry, 313 passing on 41 attempts. Lane Hatcher, he completed a season-high 71%, 5.8 yards per attempt. He did pass for 237 yards and 2 touchdowns on the season. Hatcher, a 64% completion rate, career low 6.5 yards per attempt. Now South Alabama 7-2 after their 38-31 road win at Georgia Southern. Jaguars produced a season high here, 514 yards, 321 rushing on 56 attempts. Defensively, they allowed 5 yards a carry to the Eagles with 278 passing yards on 45 attempts. Carter Bradley, they completed 59% in the win, 7.1 yards per attempt. On the season, Bradley, a completion rate of 65%, 7.9 yards per attempt. Past 3 games, Jaguars holding teams to 263 yards, only 2.5 yards per rush. Bobcats in this period running for only 2.6 yards a carry. The play here will be Texas State and South Alabama under 46.5. Southern Miss versus Coastal Carolina college football pick Saturday. Southern Miss fell to 5-4 with their 42-14 home defeat to Georgia State. Golden Eagles produced a season-low 202 yards with 33 rushing on 28 carries. Defensively, they surrendered 388 rushing yards on 59 carries and limited the Panthers' passing game. Zach Wild completed 33%, 5.2 yards per attempt. Backup Jack Lang saw action and went 4-7 for 38 yards and a pick. Third string Trey Lowe saw work and went 6-14 for 84 yards and a touchdown. Coastal Carolina moved to 8-1 with their 35-28 home win to Appalachian State. Chanticleers gained 476 yards, 192 rushing on 45 carries. On defense, they held the Mountaineers to under 4 yards a carry with 279 passing on 28 attempts. Bryce Carpenter will start for an injured Grayson McCall. He has 4 seasons at the program, saw significant action in 2019 and 2021. He has thrown for 4 passes this year in relief of McCall. Last year, he completed 59% of his passes with 7 yards per attempt, 4 touchdowns, and a pick. Both teams dealing with quarterback issues, but Southern Miss looks far worse. On the road, the Golden Eagles averaging only 2.1 yards a carry. At home, the Chanticleers run better. The player will be Coastal Carolina, -5. Rice versus Western Kentucky. College football pick Saturday. Rice improved to 5-4 with that 37-30 home win to UTEP. Rice had a season high of 502 yards, 168 rushing on 32 carries. Defensively, they allowed over 4 yards per rush with 159 passing on 28 attempts. Quarterback Riley Green did not start due to injury the past 6 weeks. TJ McMahon, 68% completions with 10.8 yards per attempt in the game. He had 334 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. This season, McMahon, 59% completions, 8 yards per attempt. Western Kentucky, 6-4 after their 59-7 road win at Charlotte. Hilltoppers gained 592 yards, 131 rushing on 17 carries. Defensively, WKU allowed Charlotte just, what was it, less than 3 yards attempt here? Yeah, less than 3 yards a carry, 223 passing on 34 attempts. Austin Reed completed 60% in the win, nearly 11 yards per attempt. He threw for 409 yards and 6 touchdowns. Reed's on the season, 68% completion rate, 28 touchdowns, 6 picks, 7.8 yards per attempt. The past 3 games, the Owls are allowing 42 points and 400 yards a game. In that period, the Hilltoppers, they're averaging 470 yards and giving up 415. The play here will be Rice and Western Kentucky over 62. New Mexico versus Air Force college football pick. This one is on Saturday. New Mexico falls to 2-7 with their 27-10 road defeat at Utah State. Lobos gained 258 yards with 216 rushing on 46 attempts. Defensively, the Lobos held the Aggies to under 3 yards per carry with 149 passing yards on 27 attempts. Miles Kendrick was benched. Now, Justin Holiday completed 7 of 18 for 42 yards in his second career start. Air Force, they improved to 6-3 with their 13-7 road win at Army. Falcons posted 324 yards with 226 rushing on 53 attempts. On defense, Air Force held the Black Knights here to just over 2 yards per rush. Zeke Daniels completed 46% of his passes, 7.5 yards per attempt, and an interception. On the year, Daniels, 47% completion rate, 9.7 yards per attempt. At home, the Falcons averaging 470 yards with 380 rushing for 6.4 yards per attempt. Lobos defense on the road is giving up 373 yards and 29 points a game. Just don't trust New Mexico to slow down this Falcons team in this road outing. The player will be New Mexico and Air Force over 37.5 points. North Texas versus UAB college football pick Saturday. North Texas moves to 6-4 with their 52-14 home win to FIU. Mean Green put up 623 yards, 209 rushing on 42 carries. Defensively, they allowed 4.5 yards per rush to the Golden Panthers with 145 passing on 39 attempts. Austin Ani completed season highs here at 73%, 414 yards and 12.2 yards per attempt. He threw for 5 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. On the season, Ani, a 59% completion rate with 9.5 yards per attempt. UAB dropped to 4-5 with their 44-28 home overtime defeat to UTSA. Blazers gained 553 yards in this one with 221 yards rushing on 39 carries. Defensively, they allowed nearly 5 yards per rush to the Roadrunners with 285 passing on 31 attempts. Dylan Hopkins, he is questionable with a concussion, but is pointing to returning on Saturday as he's practiced 2 straight days early this week. On the season, Hopkins, a 67% completion rate, 9.9 yards per attempt. Mean Green has covered 11 straight Conference USA games. Past 3 games, North Texas averaging 502 yards, with UAB surrendering 402 yards, 5 yards per rush, 7.6 yards per pass attempt. The play here will be on North Texas at +6. Liberty versus UConn college football pick Saturday. Liberty 8-1 after their 21-19 road win at Arkansas as they hit their bye week. Flames gained 315 yards on 91 rushing on 38 carries. Defensively, they held the Razorbacks to 3.5 yards a carry with 284 passing on 37 attempts. Jonathan Bennett completed 60%, 9 yards per pass attempt. He threw for 224 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick. This season, Bennett, 58% completions, 7.3 yards per attempt. UConn, they sit at 5-5 after their 27-10 home win to Massachusetts there. Huskies produced 334 yards, 274 rushing on 45 carries. Defensively, they held UMass to just over 3 yards per rush and 266 passing yards on 34 attempts. Zion Turner completed 46% of his passes in the win, 4.6 yards per attempt. This season, Turner, 60% completion rate, 5.5 yards per attempt. Both defenses good against the run. Turner a concern with accuracy and passing distance. Play here, Liberty and UConn under 46. Louisiana Tech versus UTSA college football pick Saturday. Louisiana Tech is 3-6 after their 40-24 home win to Middle Tennessee State. Bulldogs put up 446 yards with 135 rushing on 35 attempts. On defense, they allowed over 4 yards per rush to the Blue Raiders with 226 passing on 44 attempts. Parker McNeil only 42% completion rate with 8.6 yards per attempt. He threw for 285 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a pick on the year. McNeil 57% completions, 8.9 yards per attempt. UTSA improved here to 7-2 with their 44-38 road win in overtime to UAB. Roadrunners produced 494 yards, 209 rushing on 43 carries. On defense, they allowed 5.5 yards per rush to the Blazers with 332 passing yards on 39 attempts. Frank Harris completed 71% of his passes, 9.2 yards per attempt. He threw for 285 yards and 4 touchdowns. Harris, a completion rate this year of 69%, 21 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 8.6 yards per attempt. UTSA, a 6-game win streak. They moved the football for 494 yards at home. Louisiana Tech defense poor on the road, allowing 503 yards, 6.6 yards per rush, and 7.6 yards per pass attempt. Play here will be UTSA at minus the 18. James Madison versus Old Dominion college football pick for Saturday. James Madison 5-3 with their 34-10 road defeat at Louisville. Dukes had a season low 193 yards with 141 rushing on 36 attempts. On defense, they surrendered over 5 yards per rush here with 223 passing on 20 attempts. Todd Centillo, a season low 26.7% completion rate, 3.5 yards per attempt. This season, Centillo a 61% completion rate, 17 touchdowns, 4 picks, 9 yards per attempt. Old Dominion 3-6 after their 12-0 home defeat here to Marshall. Monarchs gained a season low here, 209 yards, 11 rushing on 14 carries. Defensively, they allowed nearly 6 yards per rush with 89 passing on 25 attempts. Hayden Wolf completed 52% of his passes. Season low here, 4.3 yards per attempt. This year, career low, 57% completion rate, 7 yards per attempt. Both teams on 3-game losing streaks. On the road, the Dukes are averaging 460 yards, 4.4 yards per rush. Monarchs at home averaging only 19 points a game. Play here will be James Madison at minus 7.5. Boise State versus Nevada college football pick Saturday. Boise State fell to 6-3 after their 31-28 home defeat to BYU. Broncos gained 324 yards with 104 rushing on 30 carries. Defensively, the Broncos allowed nearly 5 yards per rush to the Cougars with 377 passing yards on 42 attempts. Taylon Green completed 74% of his passes in the loss with 8.5 yards per attempt. He threw for 219 yards and 2 touchdowns. On the season, Green has completed 68%, 8.1 yards per attempt. Nevada drops to 2-7 with their 35-28 road defeat at San Jose State. Wolfpack gained 293 yards in this one, 70 rushing on 38 attempts. On defense, they held San Jose State to under 1 yard per carry with 340 passing on 45 attempts. Shane Illingworth completed 62% of his passes, 7.7 yards per attempt. He had 223 passing yards with a touchdown and a pick. On the year, Illingworth 62% completion rate with a career low 5.5 yards per attempt. Boise State has picked up the offensive production since the quarterback change. This is a Nevada team that is rebuilding. Past 3 games, the Wolfpack is averaging only 256 yards a game. Play here will be Boise State minus 20.5. Boston College versus NC State college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. BC dropped to 2-7 with their 31-28 home defeat to Duke. Eagles gained 405 yards with 75 rushing on 28 carries. Defensively, Boston College allowed nearly 6 yards per carry with 158 passing on 24 attempts. Philip Jerkovich has been injured, missed practice early this week. Emmett Moorhead completed 60% of his throws, 7.3 yards per attempt in his start. He threw for 330 yards and 4 touchdowns on the year. Moorhead, 57% completion rate, 5.5 yards per attempt. NC State sits at 7-2 after their 30-21 home win to Wake Forest. Wolfpack produced 325 yards, 115 rushing on 41 attempts. Offensively, they stuffed the Demon Deacons ground attack to under 1 yards per rush, with 397 passing on 38 attempts. Jack Chambers was benched. Third string MJ Morris completed 64%, 7.5 yards per attempt. He passed for, excuse me. Sorry about that. This season, Morris, 64% completion rate, 6 touchdowns, 8.3 yards per attempt. Morris, a major upgrade over Chambers at the quarterback position. The play here, Boston College and NC State over 41. Charlotte versus Middle Tennessee State college football pick. This one is on Saturday. Charlotte 2-8 after their 59-7 home defeat to Western Kentucky. 49ers gained 384 yards with 161 on the ground on 47 attempts. Defensively, they allowed 7 yards per rush with 461 yards passing and 41 attempts. Chris Reynolds, 63% completion rate in the loss, 7.3 yards per attempt. Reynolds threw for 196 yards with a touchdown and a pick. This season, Reynolds a 65% completion rate, 8.4 yards per attempt. Middle Tennessee State fell to 4-5 with their 40-24 road win at Louisiana Tech. Blue Raiders posted 420 yards with 194 rushing on 44 attempts. On defense, they allowed nearly 4 yards per rush to the Bulldogs with 311 yards passing on 37 attempts. On the road, the 49ers are allowing 502 yards a game, 5.3 yards per rush, 9.3 yards per attempt. Blue Raiders at home allowing 414 yards with 283 yards passing with 7.4 yards per attempt. The play here will be Charlotte Middle Tennessee State over a total of 66.5. FAU versus FIU college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. FAU 4-5 with their 24-17 home win to UAB. Alice posted 359 yards, 172 rushing on 35 attempts. On defense, FAU surrendered nearly 7 yards a carry to the Blazers with 192 passing on 34 attempts. N'Kosi Perry completed 56% of his passes, 7.9 yards per attempt. Perry threw for 3 touchdowns for 197 yards on the season. Perry a 56% completion rate, 20 touchdowns, 5 picks, 7.3 yards per attempt. FAU dropped to 10-4 after their 52-45 road defeat at North Texas. Golden Panthers here in this game had 258 yards, 113 rushing on 25 carries. Defensively, they did give up nearly 5 yards a carry, 414 passing on 35 attempts. Grayson James, 54% completion rate. And he also had, in this game, in the loss, a low 3.7 yards per attempt. James threw for 130 yards and 2 interceptions. Now, on the season, James, 61% completion rate, 5.9 yards per attempt. FIU defense is really struggling over the past 3 games here, giving up 467 yards, 7.3 yards per attempt. FAU in this period allowing 5.5 yards a carry on the ground. The play here will be FAU and FIU under 54.5. Appalachian State versus Marshall college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Appalachian State dropped to 5-4 with their 35-28 road defeat to Coastal Carolina. The Mountaineers gained 367 yards with 88 rushing on 27 carries. Defensively, App State allowed over 4 yards per rush to the Chanticleers with 284 passing on 27 attempts. Chase Bryce completed 68% in the game with 10 yards per attempt. He threw for 279 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. Marshall improved to 5-4 after their 12-0 road win at Old Dominion. The Unreal Herd gained 387 yards with 298 rushing on 56 carries. Defensively, they stuffed the Monarch ground game to under 1 yard per carry with 198 passing on 46 attempts. Cam Fancher completed 52% with a season-low 3.6 yards per attempt. He threw for 89 yards and 2 interceptions. This season, Fancher, 58.5% completion rate, 5.9 yards per attempt. Quarterback situation, the concern for Marshall. Brees, much the best, and the difference here, the play here will be Appalachian State here at -1. Army versus Troy college football pick. This one goes off here on Saturday. Army fell to 3-5 with their 13-7 home defeat to the Air Force. Black Knights gained 145 yards with 78 rushing on 35 attempts. Defensively, Army allowed about 4.5 yards per rush to the Falcons with 98 passing on 13 attempts. Jamal Jones completed just 28% of his passes for 4.8 yards per attempt. He rushed the ball 21 times with a touchdown, but only 1.8 yards per carry. On the year, Jones a 34% completion rate, 7.2 yards per attempt. He has 59 carries on the year with 5 yards per rush attempt. Now, Troy, they've improved to 7-2, a 23-17 road win at Louisiana. Trojans gained 372 yards in this one, 149 rushing on 36 attempts. Now, defensively, they've allowed over 4 yards a carry to the Raging Cajuns with 112 passing yards on 29 attempts. Gunnar Watson completed 60% of his passes, 6.4 yards per attempt. He threw for 223 yards, 2 touchdowns, and interception. Now, this season, Watson has 63% completion rate, 8.5 yards per attempt. On the road, the Black Knights allowing 463 yards, 5.2 yards per rush, 11 yards per pass attempt. At home, the Trojans holding teams to just 257 yards, 2.2 yards per rush attempt. The play here will be Troy at -9.